anything about. You guys are wearing the same color shirt. Is everything right?
That's an improvement.
Improvement from.
What you usually grace us with.
And why are you wearing a jacket in this heat and wind?
It was
And
cool where
leather.
I was coming from. Where I was coming
Leather.
from. And yeah, I would always wear it. But it was cold. It was dreary and rainy where I was coming from. I actually took a photo of the clouds in the city center, and it's actually lovely.
You're a typical Zimbabwean. When you don't see the sun, you think it's cold.
When it's raining, it turns to be cold.
Have you ever tried looking at the thermometer?
Yeah, we had that on the phone. I don't look at it when we have phones.
Well, it's still at the moment.
Yeah.
And it told you that it was cold too.
Yes.
Anyway, it's good to be with you guys again.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. I see you back in East Africa with
It's my first time this year having a reach abroad, and I must say, I miss this taste.
It's a good tea, eh?
It's absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
We have it in the office, in the kitchen at the office.
Mm.
But we drink it quite well. They don't let us drink alcohol at the office. Because we get rid of it. Yeah, no, but I'm enjoying it.
It is, it's quite musical.
On our side of the table,
the more interesting side of the table.
I've pulled out, I've been cleaning up. So I pulled up a bottle of wine that I bought in 2009 on a visit to the Western Cape. I was with my old friend Paul Soko on a business trip, and we visited the Meerlust winery, and I bought half a case of the 2004, which means the grapes in this bottle are 20 years old today. Yes, 2004 is 19 years ago, but the wine came out in 2004, which means the grapes were harvested in
Oh, why are you looking at me?
no, just educating you.
Okay.
Now,
You had this look of skepticism on your face.
now I've had a.
Oh, you broke the cork?
I broke the cork. I've had a chat with Libby. Oh, it smells awesome. I'll give you a preview. I had a chat with Libby about this, and Libby reckons the Meerlust Rubicon keeps well,
All right.
provided it's been stored well. Now, I can't.
And what does that mean? Storing it?
You've heard the saying about getting better with age, like wine.
It doesn't always apply. Some wines
Yes,
don't.
to
keep
humans and
well.
to.
So, I'm just being gentle here. So, Libby thinks we might have a good thing on our hands, although I can't swear that
Corked it.
I've taken good care of it. It's moved home a few times with me over the past 2009 to today, 14 years. And has been kept in less than ideal conditions.
Yes, I suspect you lost it more than saved it.
But
And
so
we
far to the
discovered.
nose, we'll just put a little bit there. But audience members will be glad to know that Rufaro brought a backup of whiskey in case this doesn't work. It's alright?
Yeah, it's alive. It's delicious. It's a Bordeaux blend.
Yes, it is.
It's one of the better ones. And I suspect 2004 bottle is very difficult to come by now. And I can say with some conviction that it was a good year. Cheers.
I can't tell the difference. You know that.
It's okay, stick to it.
You know what it reminds me of? You know what the smell reminds me of? Rotten grapes.
How do you even know what rotten grapes smell like?
You know when you have overripe grapes at home?
Yes.
That's what it smells like.
Yes, because they're starting to ferment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It all smells like that.
No, I'm really happy. This has just made my week. It's been worth keeping.
Yes, I completely agree.
Oh, I
It's
think
not going to last long, this bottle.
I think we're gonna have a good show. It's a little bit warm though.
Yeah,
But I dare not
try
try and do anything to cool it. That color. Okay, Ranga's going to get upset with us, but we could make the next hour about this, couldn't we?
Yes, we could easily. But Tinashe would protest. He'd be bored.
Not at all. Not at all. It might actually be better.
Yeah, well, it would certainly make better conversation than some of the things that have been happening around us. I thought it would be nice for us to just dig deeper into this re-dollarization, de-dollarization that's going on. I know we've talked about it before, but in the past few weeks, we've had the governor admit that 76% of the economy is US dollars, and we know the exchange rate the governor uses, so we know that the number is probably higher. We've had Zimstat, that bastion of truth, telling us that the economy is about 76% US dollars. And then we've had the president himself writing a column in the last week or so. Did you know he writes columns?
Yeah, he does every Sunday.
He's awake on Sundays to read things. The rest of us who don't usually read things on Sunday morning found out that the president writes a column, and he's also pointed to the same figure. So definitely the powers that be are saying to us more than 3/4 of the economy has dollarized.
To be fair, the governor did walk back a bit at the CZI conference, where he actually said that de-dollarization is actually on course, and he firmly believes in the Zim dollar and that the Zim dollar will.
Okay, you know, Sasha, you always say to us, you don't believe in anecdotes, stick to data. So the governor told us a few years ago that we are not 1-to-1. We actually had a legal instrument in 2019 that said we will not use US dollars in the domestic economy anymore. And then in 2023, the governor says we're using 76%. And you choose to believe is an anecdote that we're de-dollarizing.
No, I'm just contextualizing, right? Because you're talking about what they have said.
Okay, all right, fair enough. They've also said
They've also said.
that we're on a de-dollarization.
That's all I was pointing out. Not that I believe them or I don't.
So I mean, I think there's a couple of issues here that we've got to dig into, and one of the things that's particularly worrying me, having worked in the banking sector before, is there is no regulatory framework for this dollarization, as far as I can tell, which means we may very well be creating US dollars.
There's some regulation.
Oh, please educate us.
If you remember 2020, when they put an SI to formalize the use of US dollars as an emergency, or it wasn't, I think it was an emergency measure during COVID that you can actually trade in US dollars. So there is some sort of instrument.
Fair enough. But
And
beyond
it actually,
Look, that's
beyond that. I mean,
that's
what else?
That's academic. I mean, what you were going somewhere with this?
I'm saying, no, but his point is valid.
yeah, it is.
Fair enough. Yes, there is that. But beyond that, there isn't much more. So banks are lending in this currency, but they're applying the same capital adequacy ratios to US dollar lending as they do to Zim dollar lending. We don't know what
Not
magic.
necessarily. They're different.
Are they?
Yeah, the central bank has come out.
Oh, the last years.
Yeah.
Fair enough. We don't know what magic is happening on reserve money that I now finally understand what it is. It's a number the governor is fond of, but basically the portion of our US dollars that is sitting in the reserve bank, we don't know, is it sitting in the reserve bank? Is it being lent to the government? Is it being lent to
That's what
private sector players?
I thought that's where you were heading with this.
And what does this all mean in the end?
I think the biggest bank in the country, in US dollar terms, by far, is the National Mattress Bank. I think that to the extent that you have the formal regulated financial services sector, and it's transacting in US dollars, I think it's mostly transactional. I don't think that the average Zimbabwean, to the extent that they have savings, are comfortable keeping them in a bank. They'd rather keep them under their mattress. So I think that's the huge difference between the kind of dollarization that we're seeing today compared to what we had in 2009 and 10, where people, for the most part, were quite comfortable keeping their dollars in a bank. I think the world has changed. I think there's still, everybody remembers the loss of value that happened in, call it 2016, 2017, when we went away from one-to-one gauge. And I think, so there's the skepticism that even if you're depositing a US dollar note in the bank, promises that it will always be available on demand, there's a wee bit of skepticism. And I think most of the money, most of the US dollar economy, it doesn't actually bank that much with the formal banking sector.
No, but remember they transact and they're buying from formal businesses. Yes, that are required to bank this money. And those same formal businesses trust and believe that that money, once they've banked it, is available to withdraw or to make payments as and when they need it.
So maybe let's break down the numbers. From what Rufaro is saying, the National Mattress Bank, we estimate that it has about 2 billion real hardcore cash in that economy. And to his argument, a lot of that actually trades in the informal sector. So yes, some of it does find its way in the formal sector. So it trades, the 2 billion is trading in the informal sector, but yes, some of it finds its way in the formal sector. But usually when it finds its way in the formal sector, it's eventually shipped out to bring in fuel or whatever imports that we're importing. In the formal sector, from RBZ on numbers, total deposits is 2 billion. Of that 2 billion, about 1 billion is actual hardcore cash. So the banks have created another 1 billion, but I think that, and I think you looked at adequacy ratios and loan to deposit. It's still, at this point, it's still fair. So at this point, you can still withdraw your money if it's a small amount. Can the banking system, answering directly to your question, is the question we should ask, because in the informal sector, if you were to take 100 million and transfer 100 million anywhere in the world, it will be transferred, bar, rules around transferring that kind of money. But can our banking system today, can they transfer 100 million or 200 million today?
Yeah, and
that's the test.
And then there's also a question of who's running that experiment, because there was a big listed company, at the time of one-to-one gauge, that was sitting on a few $100 million US dollars on the basis that it's healthy to sit on, US dollar cash. And then they woke up one day and turns out they'd lost several tens of millions of dollars of value because it was not one-to-one gauge anymore. And they eventually paid a huge special dividend to get rid of that cash. And the shareholders, it's no problem to get that money from the reserve. Right? But what I'm saying is, the board and management of that company are not going to make the same mistake again. So, we went back to Zim dollars and now the economy is moving back to US dollars. I doubt very much that they would comfortably sit on a huge US dollar cash deposit after such an experience.
No, I think, to be fair, a lot of the multinationals are not interested. Remember, they've got a long-term view of them, or of trading generally. Mm-hmm. They're not going to trade in the para market. Mm-hmm. They're not going to trade outside.
They can't.
They can if they really wanted to, because the local guys do, right? But they love to stick to the rule of law, whatever.
They'll stick to the rules, however, but they just won't sit on as much cash.
No, they are, because sometimes sometimes you sit on cash because you're just generating a lot of cash, but you don't believe in them, so you're not investing that cash, right? So ideally, and this is everywhere in the world, if you really believe in your investment case, you're more likely to be
expanding your operation,
cash flow negative than cash flow positive. But when you're cash flow positive, it actually tells us that you've got a very dim view of the country. So they're sitting on, but commodity prices have been going up. You're sitting on these large amounts of cash and you're wondering what to do with them. And I'm saying that the true test, to answer George's question directly, is if any of them pass a special dividend, can we transfer 100 or 200?
Or even not a dividend, but even if they decide they want to import a new factory, will they be able to wire $50 million over 3 months to Germany and get a machine back?
Or immediately?
Yeah.
Can they? Because we're saying that there's 100 million, there's 1 billion cash.
No, I'm just saying more realistically, you don't pay for a factory in one installment.
Yeah.
You pay over 3
time.
months. Will they be able to, with a degree of conviction, enter into an
Certainty.
agreement with a German company that we're going to make 3 payments over 90 days for this factory and you guys are going to ship it?
Yeah, so I think the very fact that we're having this conversation tells us the answer. Because, why would we even be discussing it if it wasn't obvious that you can move such a large amount of
there
money?
could be a number of reasons. And here I want to be fair. Or as fair as one could
No,
possibly.
I'm very impressed with you today. I think the governor might even invite you for tea. You're being very supportive of him today. So far.
Well, I'm not supportive of it, but I'm just giving context so that when we do then critique, we critique out of the burdens of facts, not just because we want to. And I'm saying that, to be fair, if you were anywhere else in the world, it would be very difficult to transfer 500 million or 200 million just like that, right, to be fair. And in
Why?
Zimbabwe,
Why?
we've had cases, well, generally because of the banking system. Fractional
reserve banking.
Reserve banking means that the bank, because you're literally taking a deposit out. So even though the deposit on your balance, it actually says you have 300 million in our bank. But the nature of fractional banking is that I'm unable.
Okay, I think we're going down a rabbit hole. Carry on with your...
No, I'm just saying this is the reality.
Yeah,
the
no,
reality is...
Your point is that you don't think it would have been possible anywhere else in the world.
I don't... no, I'm just saying let's contextualize that anywhere else in the world, it will still be very difficult. Unless
Why
you're
a
a
big
country...
number, yes.
Yeah, because it's a big number. So when you compare, if you're saying we've got $1 billion cash, and then somebody wants to withdraw 20%, and it's just one client, I think that anywhere else in the world, it would be very difficult. Even in the US system, if somebody said, oh, I want to transfer, 20%,
Yes.
they would need... So instead of 90 days, you probably need a year. So...
No, you do it in 90 days. You couldn't do it immediately. But typically what happens in the rest of the world, or even here, is the CFOs or the finance directors of banks and the finance directors of their biggest clients are very close friends. Well, friends in inverted commas. So... Hey,
You know when
I'm going to make a big payment next month. And then the finance
ensure
director of
that
the
your
bank
liquidity...
runs around and organizes it. But this is a question of him selling some assets on his balance sheet, getting the cash on his position and moving.
it, yeah.
It's not a question of him calling his own banker, who is the Reserve Bank, and saying, I'd like to move the money. And
Well,
his
that's-
own banker says, wow.
Well, that's. I think now you're getting into the intricacies that I wanted to get into, so that our critique is actually embedded in facts and not just, from thin air. So the third element that historically, which I wanted to highlight, is when you now know there's a problem, is in 1996 or 1997, there was a time when somebody raised money and they had a few millions, tens of millions.
20 to be precise.
No, it was more than that. And they put it at the Reserve Bank, and they say this is a big amount, and we're gonna put it in the at the Reserve Bank, and when we want to make a payment, we should be able to, and we can make those calls, and we can have the friendly chats, and we should be able to.
You're talking about Mikkels.
I don't know the company, but what we know is after 3 years or so, they couldn't make any payment whatsoever.
Did they ever manage to get
Yeah,
the money?
eventually they were given TBs.
So they never got
And
their money.
then, well, they did because they got TBs at an interest rate, and then they were able to then ship their money. But this was like 20 years later. So I wanted to first of all just highlight these nitbits. It seems like we're being pedantic, but it's necessary so that our critique.
Naturally, it's nothing if not pedantic.
Yeah, so that our critique is actually embedded in the reality on the ground. So when we look at the reality on the ground, we're saying that making payments, and this is to your point, making payments, a formalized dollarized environment takes a lot. It takes a framework. Right now, we don't have a framework. Now, the framework that we have is local clearing, which is RTGS. Now, for foreign clearing, the banks actually are holding that US dollars in their nostro accounts offshore somewhere. So they have those balances, and the central bank has oversight. So you can't just make a payment from your foreign account. The central bank still has to approve, but that is still outside. So making international payments, as long as the bank is funded and as long as the finance directors have had the discussion, you should be able to make those payments of the offshore cash. The worry is there's about 500 million cash that we are told there's 500 million cash locally, where there's clearing that's happening, and that's happening through the central bank. That's the big worry. Does the central bank have that cash it's saying it has on its balance sheet?
And one of the things that worries me about that, and it's a little issue, and I know you don't like anecdotes, but the government has made payroll on time, consistently in US dollars. It must be the only business, the only entity in this country that has consistently made US dollar payroll on time. I find that somewhat suspicious. Then a couple
Isn't it a good thing when organizations make payroll on time?
No, he's talking about the context. The context
No,
is
he's being sarcastic. Then there's a couple of issues, right? So banking in the modern world is called fractional reserve banking. Now, fractional reserve banking has two key elements. It means that a bank only has to keep a fraction of the deposits because the bank makes a bet that not more than a certain percentage of customers would ever want their money at the same time. And then it can invest the rest of the deposits for profit in loans and other assets. This system works based on two principles. One is called capital adequacy, which is that for every dollar that a bank puts at risk, it must have a certain number of cents of its own money. Cents in the dollar. This is fine because there is a lender of last resort. If all else fails and the bank cannot sell its assets or cannot collect its loans on time and pay depositors as and when they want their money, the bank can run to the lender of last resort, usually the central bank, and get a loan, yes, at a punitive interest rate, but it can get a loan to cover the gap until it can sort itself out. Now, we don't have a lender of last resort in US dollars.
we do.
Who?
The central bank, because the central bank has actually been taking reserves.
No, but how many US dollars of its own does it have?
No, it doesn't have of
Because-
its own. But it's not necessary for it to have its own reserves if it has taken the banking system's reserves. Because the idea of taking, let's say, 20% of the entire reserves is of the 2 billion deposits. It should have 400 million, right? And the 400.
Say that
million,
again slowly to yourself.
Sorry.
Say that again slowly to yourself.
Okay, so it's 2 billion, and 20% of reserves.
Is 400 million.
Yeah.
And at number 80, Samora Machel is 400 million.
No, I'm saying theoretically. So the first thing is I just want to highlight what the theory says. That the theory is, what I'm trying to argue is, it doesn't have to have its own reserves. It has taken 400 million of the banking system's reserves, and of that 400
You
million,
can use it as a lender of last resort.
whenever, because it's never that every bank
Fair
wants
enough.
fails.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Whoever wants overnight accommodation, they should be able to provide. But where you have a point, so the first thing is I wanted to say, to highlight theoretically what should happen. Where you do have a point is this has never happened. Like the banks themselves do not trust that if they should go to the central bank to get accommodation in US dollars, they will get it. So that is a warning sign. So this is where you do have a point that you need to sort of provide some sort of legal framework and common best practice on how we're going to trade. Because if it's true that it's now 76%, never mind what's happening on the cash market, but the 76% requires that the central bank provide some sort of framework on how it's actually going to operate. Because if it doesn't, then we are in for a rude awakening later on.
And the hotter the money, the more the reserves you need. So in a normal economy, so if you go to Europe and the first world, banks only need to keep about 3 or 4%. They only need to have capital equivalent to 3 or 4% of the loans they create. Because a big portion of their deposits are long-term deposits. So you can almost, be 100% certain that these people won't come for their money for 2 or 3 years. And then the portion that could come for their money is much smaller. I don't know anyone who's got a US dollar time deposit in Zimbabwe. Do you?
So it's you're forced. I can tell you who has, and they've been forced. The legacy debt.
Okay.
Remember, that's now coming as TB, and you're given 20-year.
Yeah, but that's not as okay. So yeah, a bank might consider it deposits, which I think is funny accounting, but
yes,
story for another day. Besides those people, everybody else is sitting on a current account deposit. So the whole banking system could literally tomorrow show up asking for their money. The banks don't have the capital because the entire capital of the banking system is a few hundred million,
maybe 500 million.
500 million.
Yeah. If we're being generous.
If they sold all their cars, their desks, their pens and paper and their software, they maybe get 500 million, depending on how they valued their cars and desks and chairs.
And this is an official exchange rate.
And the Reserve Bank has how much more to add to that?
Well, now the Reserve Bank must have 500 million in reserves, or 400 million. Do they have the 400 million?
You read their numbers.
What I said, this is the distinction I'm making, that the numbers say we have $1 billion cash, right? So if we were to go to all the banks, let's find out how much cash they have. Then we must go to the central bank. So half of that would be at the central bank, and should have as reserves or whatever it is. There should be money at the Reserve Bank.
Okay.
So the furthest the balance sheet just says is we have $1 billion. We don't know who has what, but you could ask one of your minions to go around the banks and see how much cash.
Did you just say minions?
It's not shit. We're in a woke world. You can't use words like that.
I'm not woke. I'm sure you know this.
But yes, yeah, you could walk around the banking halls and get these numbers. Yeah, I mean, if anyone didn't know that, in every banking hall in this country, the bank's balance sheet is there.
So you look for the cash, how much cash they have. So we'll go.
Yeah, but it will be in dollars and.
No. They must separate. No, they've always had to separate.
Yeah.
According to currencies. You've never read it, have you?
So if you do that, then you know how much cash the banks have. Then the rest should be sitting at the central bank. Now the question becomes, is it truly sitting at the central bank? But the confidence issue, and that's if I was a governor or anyone looking at the ZIMS scenario, the confidence issue is if the banks really believed that the central bank was the lender of last resort in US dollars, then they would actually be lending more. But I think right now they're operating in silos.
Yeah. And the capital adequacies are in the 30s or 40s.
Yeah,
right?
30s. Yeah, that's pretty.
That's very low and inefficient for a bank.
But it's because they know that in that one-off occasion when they need to go to the central bank, they're not going to get any accommodation. So they're like, you know what, would rather be very conservative and have cash on our.
Well, in other words, they're saying we're only going to lend our own money. We're not lending depositors' money. Oh, yeah, lend very little deposit money.
That's a good way of actually looking at it. That banks are lending their own capital to themselves or to.
No, well, and that's why it's hard to get along. Because they're risking their own money, so they're very, very critical about who.
Yeah, but also
they lend to
if
and under what conditions.
Who's actually borrowing US dollars to expand operations here?
No, working capital.
Working
in fact,
capital and
now
expenses.
66% of the banking, 64% of the banking loans are in US dollars.
And the agriculture sector, and I'm not talking about the local agriculture sector, not maize and that.
Tobacco.
The export agriculture sector is drawing down huge on loans. Quite a few manufacturing entities have drawn down to recapitalize their factories and make themselves competitive regionally.
Well, it was also a way of getting around the auction, because if you're paying down your loans,
There's no
surrender requirement.
Yeah.
So, we don't have a guest today, but hypothetically, I move my chair over and Dr. John comes and sits here. Or maybe I sit in the middle, Dr. John here and Mtuli on the other side. Or Mtuli sends George, whichever. Your advice?
I think that if we have recognized...
Don't say currency board. Everybody's heard that one.
No, it's not currency board. It's presently what's required tomorrow is a legal framework and terms of trade. So terms of operating, how are banks going to operate in a dollarized economy or in a dual economy? Because now we've recognized that it's actually a dual currency economy, and 76 of the trades is actually happening in US dollars. And I would say to them, I think now is the time to create a framework for how we will actually trade. There are other things that I thought you as accountants would highlight. You seem to be
We're not accountants anymore.
more interested in the economics, but how should companies now account, right? If 76 of your underlying economy is actually in US dollars, and yet when you give us your historical accounts, you're giving us in Zim dollars, even if you consider. So there are a lot more questions.
Have you read the set of accounts?
Yes.
Okay, so now I'm going to defend my profession here.
Please do.
Have you read the set of accounts lately?
Yes,
It's
I
a set
have.
of accounts.
Yes.
It says, do you know that every company in this country that produces Zim dollar accounts has got a qualification?
Yes.
That the accountants say, we don't know what these numbers mean, but the law says we must give them to you. So we're giving you these numbers. If we had our own way, we'd give you
real numbers.
But that's what I'm actually highlighting, that actually if we had the doc and professor, we would actually say to them, you know what, this is now the reality. You actually now need to create a framework, and you need to create a proper framework in which everybody can operate. How we report, how we trade, how banking is actually going to happen. Because I think there's systemic and also uncertain risk that is now being induced in the system, primarily because we don't know. So even the reporting. So as an economist, I'm also worried about the reporting, because I want to know what Reserve Bank actually has and what it doesn't have.
So yes, there's that the reporting of the banks and the Reserve Bank. But now think about this, right? You're a local bank, and you go to a conference, you make friends with a big international bank, and you say, hey, come on guys, give us a line, give us a 200 million line, we've got all these fantastic clients. In their due diligence, they're going to get a couple of recent MBAs to get on a plane and come and see how you guys run your credit around there. And they're going to say, can we see some files? And every file you're going to pull out has financial statements that have got a disclaimer from a qualification from the auditors, because the auditors have said, we don't know what these numbers mean. But what do you think this young MBA is going to go back and tell his bosses in wherever
That's the
he's coming?
systemic risk I'm talking about.
Yes.
We've just... So
But-
what I'm saying
but-
is de-risk.
So
And they can de-risk. At this point, they can.
I have a different perspective. So we're now, the economy is now 76% USD. If you go back a year or 3 years or 5 years, it was a smaller percentage, right? So the trend is quite clear. And what we were just discussing about the accounts of companies tells us that a lot of the problems that we have at a macroeconomic level is because you've got this part of the economy that's in US dollars, and you've got all sorts of rules and regulations around how that works. And then you've got the Zim dollar economy, and it's got its auction and all sorts of quirks and regulations and that sort of thing. But if the trend is clear that we know how this movie is going to end, we're going to dollarize, why not just dollarize outright?
Because
immediately?
we're de-dollarizing. Weren't you listening?
No. But what I'm saying is, but your question was, what advice would you give? And I'm saying, look, the trend is it's clear. We are dollarizing. That's where the economy is going, and a lot of the challenges doing business in this part of the world is the fact that there's a Zim dollar and there's a US dollar, and
it's complicated,
and it's just it's a headache. So why not, instead of making defending this futile local currency of ours, why not accept where it's going to end up? We don't know whether it's got another 6 months in it or 18 months, whatever it is. Why not just say, you know what? Let's just go straight to the end, dollarize.
Okay, so I think, and this is where I would actually come with a currency board. So I think there's a tactical thing that if they're sitting here, immediately I'll say today, what you need to have is a target operating model. And your target operating model right now is to sit back and watch. That's probably not the best thing to do.
No.
Oh, they're not sitting back and watching. They are. They are very active on the policy front, issuing.
But okay, they're reactive. They're not being proactive. I think that's his point.
Yeah, you must have a target operating model at this point and say, if you're saying it's 76% US dollars, this is what we want. This is the model in which everybody must operate under in terms of accounting. So the three functions of money, right?
Yes,
Unit
accounting,
of
store value,
value,
and for transactions.
And transactions. Yeah. So what you want is a target operating model for those three, and say this is how it's actually going to operate the US dollar economy. Everything that they have done has to do with Zim dollars.
I actually tend to agree with both of you, by the way.
No, I'm saying what he's saying, the dollarization is step 2.
Yes.
So it's more strategic. And say, okay, what then does this mean? And I'm saying, that's where I disagree with Ruvaro, is that he's saying let's go full on.
No, that's not what he's saying call a spade a spade. Stop calling a spade a cousin of a shovel. I heard that in a meeting today. But I think, call a spade, accept that this is what's happened, we've re-dollarized.
But 24%, Zim dollar still has legs.
Okay, but whatever it is, just call it what it is what he's saying. And I agree with that. And you're saying put in place legal and regulatory framework. I agree with that. But I think that...
An operating model.
And an operating model. But I think that those two should be in pursuit of a lender of last resort. Because we are sitting on a huge systemic risk as a country.
And that's where I disagree with Ruvaro. That actually in pursuit of a lender of last resort, we already know what happens with our lender of last resort. This is where you need a currency board.
Yes, where there's a currency board.
In pursuit of lender of last resort, but let the lender of last resort not sit in Zimbabwe and not sit at 80 Samora Machel. Let him sit at
in Joburg,
or Switzerland, or anywhere else in the world, and where we will know, or even AEFDB.
And you know what? I'm actually not even opposed to going to a big international commercial bank. Take a bank like Citibank. It's much bigger than us. I'm not opposed to going there and doing a deal with them where they say pay us 3% to issue your guarantee or whatever. And all of us as Zimbabweans actually pay a little tax to Citibank so that they make sure that our money never goes to that thing again.
Then you have some sort of comfort. Then the banks will actually start lending because what Citibank will do is they will actually give you an overdraft.
Yeah,
right?
but yes,
because then they're sitting on these reserves, and it's
but
it's
here's the
something
thing.
unusual.
Sorry, before you say that, this is really good, isn't it?
It is. It's phenomenal.
Oh,
absolutely
you
sublime.
don't know what you're missing out on.
I do know, and I'm quite happy.
It's waited 20 years.
Yep.
And it's been worth it. My only regret is I was sharing it with you. not someone more dear to me.
So what does it say?
I have no
I hope those who are dear to you are watching.
You see, so what saddens me about this conversation is that...
Do you still remember your train of thought?
Yes.
Okay.
What saddens me is that... So, the reason why we're having this particular conversation is that only 24% of the economy is in dollar. The trend of where it's going is very clear. And the reality if we're going to call a spade, is that all the policy action that we're seeing, even this discussion of de-dollarization, is basically the policymakers telling the market that they want to hold on to this Zim dollar for as long as possible, right? With all its convolutions and complications and headaches, they are going to keep it alive, kicking and screaming till the very end. And if they were given to looking at the world the way you describe, creating a framework or that's progressive, they'd have done it already.
Well, I think they're clueless at this point, and I'll tell you why they're clueless. And this is where I actually heavily disagree with you. That if you think about it, 24% of the economy is Zim dollar. If you put that in real terms, that's 6-7 billion US dollar.
Mm-hmm.
That's about the size of Rwanda. So you can't ignore it. It's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And I would actually argue for the governor and say that, okay, if you guys really think and feel very strongly about the Zim dollar, actually creating a target operating model for the US dollar would actually ease up pressure from the Zim dollar economy. If you still want to maintain that Zim dollar, it's $7 billion economy. It's the size of Rwanda, if you think about it, and it's necessary.
Please, can you stop repeating one country? Pick another one.
No, because it's in the news, so at least people will understand that our Zim dollar economy is the size of Rwanda, so it's still a big economy, and essentially it's treasury paying out salaries and the Zim dollar and contractors and whatever. But the pressure now is that there's...
That's actually very interesting. Sorry, make your point and then I'll come.
Okay, all right. So what I'm actually trying to say is that they're actually in a very good position today, where if they create a target operating model for the economy, for the dollarized economy, it then allows less pressure on the Zim dollar. And then the Zim dollar can actually start to operate functionally, somewhat. It will still go the way you're saying, because we know these guys are given to printing. It will still go there, especially in an election year. But we're just saying it's got a bit of legs, and those legs can run, however short they are. So that's all I'm saying, that right now they've got a very good time to create this model that we're talking about. A lot of the companies will move to the US dollar economy, right? Especially if now there's a functioning model.
How do you manage fungibility between these two economies?
An exchange rate. That's the beauty of the exchange rate. Yeah, but right now there's too much meddling. There's so much intervention. There's so much arbitrage. There's so much.
But Tinashe, I think
so. The exchange rate, the dual economy, is then managed by an exchange rate.
Yeah, that's what we have now.
No, we don't have that, because right now there's a lot of arbitrage between the two.
But you see, here's the thing. What you're saying would make sense if the reason we went from almost 100% Zim dollar to 24% is because the Zim dollar has been under attack by some external force that is bent on destroying it, right? But actually,
there is an external force that we've identified several of these.
No, and we actually agree with Rufaro.
We keep bringing another one.
Yeah, it's gone from close to 100% to 24% because of own goals, right? Because the issuer has undermined it, right? And if they were to commit today that they were not going to print anymore, the Zim dollar would actually, over time, because Zimbabweans are very skeptical right now, but over time, people will actually realize, this currency is not so bad. It works. It hasn't lost value in a bunch of months. Maybe I can hold more of my portfolio in Zim dollars.
No, but if we go back to our discussion this afternoon or this evening, yes, you're right. If they simply did that, it could work. But we still have this Wild West happening in the US dollar economy. And we need to tame that Wild West.
How? Okay, tame is the wrong word. But to reconcile your 2 points, because I get where you're going, and I just need to reconcile with Rufaro. Rufaro, I actually agree with you. All we're saying is, part of the problem with the Zim dollar economy is, and I come back to Rwanda, is believing that the US dollar economy is as big as Zambia. The Zim dollar economy is as big as Zambia, when it's actually just as big as Rwanda. So that reality is what's creating these arbitrage opportunities, where the central bank now believes that the gold coin is actually necessary in sucking up. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
They've only done about 34 million of them. I don't think anybody in that 80s and more Marshall is under any
it's $1 too much, is what I'm trying to say, and it will get worse. That's his point. And I'm just saying that actually, if you were to correctly divide the two economies, and you allowed the two economies to actually operate and to coexist, it'll actually be better for you, because one thing that's going to happen is actually formalization of the banking sector will actually be good for you, because your own tax revenue will actually start increasing, right? And you will find it easier to make your payments. That's one. And the Zim dollar will then actually allow you, it will take off pressure from arbitrage. Because right now there's serious arbitrage that's happening.
What do you mean pressure from arbitrage?
No,
let me give you an example. You don't understand the arbitrage that's actually happening. The difference between the power market rate and the auction rate.
No,
that's arbitrage.
But you guys are not actually.
It means you're actually taking US dollar from somebody who, if that person kept their money in a US dollar account, that US dollar account would have created a deposit, would have created more credit, would have created more economic activity. But what's actually happening is you're taking out that US dollar and you're using it suboptimally.
No, okay. I mean, you guys are saying the same thing, right? And you like talking about casino economics. If this was a casino, right, you want everybody to believe they can come in with real money and get chips. And the chips are good inside the casino. So if one chip buys a glass of wine at 9 o'clock when you arrive in the casino, it should buy a glass of wine at 3 in the morning.
Or 6 months later.
Or 6 months later.
Yeah.
But if
you can't just be issuing out new chips.
Yes, and the bar lady keeps changing the price because there are more chips.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the real money are left in the safe at the cashier. I don't really know what's going on with it. And there's a real chance that I'll come back when I want to leave the casino.
And I can't exchange.
Or the exchange rate is now arbitrary. I have no idea
what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So if you want to run a successful casino, tell people give them confidence that when they bring their real money to the casino, they get so many chips, and those chips are good.
But George, your analogy is actually beautiful, because I can do one better. Is that actually what you're saying is, because there are these problems and a lot of your customers have their US dollars and would rather use their US dollars than your chips, why don't the two coexist?
Why don't you let them buy wine with their real money?
With their real money, or whatever, trade, whatever, with their real money, but create a framework. What it does, it creates less pressure on you with your own chips. The printing of the chips that was actually happening when you had US dollars and there was a lot of arbitrage.
Yeah, but I'll tell you why.
You will still print, but there will be less pressure, is all I'm arguing. The nature is they will print.
Basically, let's be clear that chips only work in the casino.
Yeah.
First of all, I think that's what he's saying. Let's be clear.
Dollars only work in the
casino. But let's be clear about it in terms of our framework, that the chips only work in the casino. And this is how new chips are created. So now, when the casino wants to pay its staff, it can pay them in chips because it's clear rules. When the casino owner wants to buy steak and wine for his family and his friends, he can buy a dinner with chips.
But okay, no, I hear you, and I think I'll actually use the minister's words at the beginning of his term and just before he signed on.
That was a different man.
And you see,
he doesn't know that guy.
So the challenge with your solution.
No, it's not a solution.
Or your suggestion, right, of this framework, right, is that there's been so much chopping and changing and skullduggery with the Zim dollar framework that it's never going to engender any faith and confidence. The only way, if you actually want to have a Zim dollar framework that works,
okay, I see where we're different.
What I would do,
I think I recognize now.
What I would do is what the minister said at the beginning, when it was 100% US dollars. Say, look, guys, we're going to operate within this US dollar framework. And then when the economy is at a place where we've got reserves and we've got all these other important things on the checklist, we can then have a conversation with the market about a local currency that will work because it's built on a foundation of stone, not sand.
Okay, so that's not what we're actually saying. We're actually saying that our big worry is the casino has now opened up the US dollar, but there's no framework in how the US dollar must work. So what's going to happen is the US dollar will eventually become like the chips, eventually, if there's no framework.
Because the bar lady
He's
taking US dollars and putting chips in the till.
I get it. So
Exactly.
But
and we don't know. She also doesn't know how to operate.
No.
She's not quite clear. And when you win, it's not quite clear. Are you winning US dollars or you're winning chips?
But you see, I think this is one of the fundamental differences between the dollarization that we are witnessing today and what we saw between 2009 and 2013. It's that to the extent that people are transacting in US dollars in the formal financial services sector, it's only transactional. Nobody has exposure that's meaningful to them in the formal banking sector.
It's $2 billion US dollars.
Right? I think the
Sorry, no.
I don't know.
Sorry, I don't know where you're getting that from.
Yeah.
Have you read the pension fund's financials?
Yeah, the pension funds are.
You and me.
No, look. So here's the thing, right? Everybody who actually, I like that you mentioned the pension funds. I'm saying that, and you're kind of making my point for me that they are regulated entities that have no option but to do 100% plus of their business through the formal banking sector, right? But I believe the US dollar economy, for the most part, is informal, and it's not keeping its money.
No. The opposite is true. So of the 76%, if we were to use your numbers, so I'm not going to create my own numbers. I'm going to use your numbers.
It's not his numbers.
No, he believes in those numbers, right? So we have a basis in which to make an argument. Can we separate the two? What's informal and what's formal? And if you're saying 2 billion is in the informal sector, I'm saying there's also 2 billion in the formal sector, right? So there's actually a lot more trade that's actually happening in the formal. If you look at our imports, I think the formal sector imported, I think, close to 4 or 5 billion went through the banking sector, right? I don't think that much is going through the informal sector. How much are we transferring in the informal sector to outside trade, for outside trade?
We don't know.
Formal dollarized. And what we're saying is the problem is if this thing goes on without a target operating model, what's going to happen is going to move away from formal to informal, where it's purely cash.
I mean, look, I know you don't like anecdotes, but if you speak to most people that work for exporting companies or companies that earn US dollars, their biggest gripe with their employer is, but my employer collects US dollars and he pays me RTGS. But remember, until a couple of weeks ago, the employer was only getting 60% value in US dollars, which he needed to immediately send back to buy raw materials. And so his entire workforce was earning largely Zim dollars. And even if you up it to the 85-15 that we're talking about now, those people maybe have moved now to 50-50 Zim dollar US dollar.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
The
Zim dollar is a real thing.
Yeah. And what we are saying is, while we're in the casino, you can use your US dollars or you can use the chips. You can decide. And if you're an exporter and part of it, 25% is Zim dollars, you're going to use the Zim dollars. But when you move out of the casino, you can still use your US dollars. And we're just working with the reality.
And there's a guaranteed framework of how to change between the two.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you're not changing outside of the casino. There's no guy who's sitting outside the casino.
So,
saying,
okay,
if you have US dollar, I can give you a better deal.
So okay, I basically reading between the lines, what you guys are saying is that on our current
between the lines, it's very clear.
On current trajectory, this version of dollarization is going to end in tears.
Yes.
Yeah, we know that.
We've been down this road.
What we're more worried about is not the Zim dollar. You're still worried about it.
Yeah, I'm talking about the US dollars.
We're worried about the US dollar.
That too is going to end in tears.
It's going to end in tears if there's no framework. Right now, there's no framework. It's going to end in tears. And it's already ending in tears. Well, the tears have started because, Kanyemba, if you look at Kanyemba and you look at Mbudzi interchange, that's a cause for worry for anyone who has US dollars in the system, because now the government is borrowing in US dollars.
Domestic US dollars. So the government is going to domestic savers and saying, give us 360 million. Okay, it's not really 360 if you read the Gazette. It's 42. But anyway, story for another day.
Yeah.
Saying, give us this money, we'll pay you back after 5 years. Does the government export anything?
Where's going to
The
get
taxes exporters.
Does the government have a toll gate in Mbudzi?
What's interesting is, I think the Plumtree Road, it was supposed to be 10 years, right? You know what happened after the 10 years? It was supposed to be...
We haven't finished paying for it.
We haven't finished, and you know why? Because currency changed along the way.
Yeah, it used to be, yeah.
It used to be, they used to actually collect real money, and they could, within 10 years, but what happened?
And the Plumtree Road, the lender is running the toll gates. He runs the toll
And then
gates
suddenly he
himself.
was forced to accept, Zim dollar chips.
So now every time somebody swipes, he's got enough money to pay for the receipt.
So that's all we're saying. What we're saying is actually that the Zim dollar does have a bit of lags. It's an economy.
But okay, I mean, Ranga is jumping up and down. This Kanyemba...
Should have a sip of this.
Yeah, he should have. This Kanyemba and Mbudzi stories. I mean, so the government has gone and borrowed 360 million for Kanyemba. How much was it from Mbudzi?
88 million.
So nominally 448
48, yeah.
million dollars from the domestic market. But okay, maybe I'm being facetious. I've read the thing. It's 42 and what did you say the other ones? 88.
88.
So 130 million from the domestic market. And they're going to pay over five years.
Yeah.
And for Mbudzi, we're paying 5%, I think.
Yeah.
If it's the best of my reading.
Plus fees and whatever.
Yeah.
Just I think it's about 9%.
For Kanyemba, it's clear. It's 9%.
Yeah.
It's SOFRA plus 5%. SOFRA is the new LIBOR for US dollars.
Yeah.
Plus 5%. So it's 9.5% for Kanyemba. Is this a good deal?
Bad deal. Because it's just, they're creating money, they're creating US dollars. And we all know that in 5 years they won't be able to pay. So what's going to happen in 5
No,
years?
for Kanyemba, they're paying every year. If you actually read it. That's
Uh,
why it's only 42 years. It's 60 million revolving every year, but you must pay a 30% deposit. So you actually only get 42
Yeah.
every year, and you must pay it back.
Will they be able to still pay
Look,
back in 5 years?
Look,
The question still remains. Will they be, even year one, will they be able to? Just this year or last year, we had a backlog of currency on the foreign exchange market.
on the auction,
So, on the auction.
which
And those
apparently we've cleared.
apparently. So what's going to happen? And then that's why we need our US dollar
But
economy
look, I
to have
think,
some sort of framework.
okay, I confess I haven't read the detail, but I think
Why does this not surprise us?
But I think that it makes sense to marry long-term infrastructure projects with long-term borrowing.
But is 5 years a long term?
Well, they can refinance after 5 years.
I mean, Tinashe just pointed out we haven't finished paying for Plumtree Mutare, which was done GNU days. So we're now in year 12 or so thereabouts, and we haven't finished paying for it. Why do we think we can pay for Mbudzi in 5?
Yeah, that's a good point. We generally have a very bad track record with our creditors.
Okay, we've got some comments from the audience.
Sure.
Okay, so we've got one says, Persistence Kwanyanya, member of the MPC, insisted that the auction exchange rate and the open market rate have converged. If this is so, what is the point of carrying on with the auction system? There hasn't been any convergence.
No, I was just going to... Okay, you've been more polite. I was going to say... if you've got $1 in your pocket, take it to auction.
Okay, you're spot on reporting. It's just a mess at the moment. Again, target operating model. They need to sort that out. And I'm surprised that the chartered accountants haven't come out very strongly on this.
Look, they've put it on the face of every set of financials. I don't know what else do you expect from them.
Okay. But the problem is that the politicians can change goalposts anytime. And as citizens, we have learned from the very best, and we can't be robbed again. Or kuchikiwa takavura maziso sedemba. I think I tend to agree with that. I think that
Actually, you guys have just demonstrated the opposite. Basically, what you're saying is that a huge part of the US dollar economy actually interfaces with the formal banking sector, which is at the whims and caprices of the policymaker, so it can end in tears. So it can happen again,
no, we're saying that there's a cash economy. That's
which is
running
much,
around.
much smaller.
No, he's right. Sorry, he's right. He's actually come around to our conclusion that it can
Yeah.
happen again.
No, it can. But I'm saying there are people who are wiser. There are people who are forced to be in the formal market.
Yes.
And what would be very interesting is, in their personal capacities, the managers in their personal capacities, do they keep money in the bank account, in their bank
The
account?
managers of
These multinational businesses.
Well,
It will be very
no,
interesting.
I would even go further and muse about the civil servants
Yeah.
that pen these instruments. I'd be very curious.
Do they keep their money?
when they get their
withdraw.
pile of Zim dollars at the end of the month? Do they go to their bank and ask for an interest rate and place it on fixed deposit, or do they get rid of it as quickly as they can?
As you say, there's a queue for deposits and there's a queue for withdrawals. You know, so everybody's just withdrawing their money, and that's part of the problem. Is we haven't formalized our dollarization. We need to create a framework, and I would actually suggest one where the banks have greater control, and that money, if we are all in agreement, should not sit at the central bank, should not sit in Samora Machel, should sit somewhere offshore.
And I think that power should be surrendered to.
Yes, but you've been hopping
Big
about
brother,
a
someone
currency
else.
board for a minute, and I mean, like on a scale of 0 to 10, right? All these great suggestions that we've discussed today. What's the likelihood of any of them actually being implemented?
Between 0 and 1%.
Now, I'm a bit more optimistic. I think
It doesn't mean that we stop. You know the reason why we do this show, or why we write and we go on. The pain I have, or what I don't want, is my kids to grow up and think that we're all stupid, right? It's the reason why we're discussing this is that, and archiving, is that eventually in 10, 20, 30, or even 50 years, people will actually see that actually we were not all stupid. We knew what was happening, and then maybe they can build on it. How do you create a society that has politics and economics acting at the same time? How best can we do it? Because what's going to happen, we tend to do that, right? We look at what our fathers did or our grandfathers and we're like, oh, that was so stupid. We really don't understand the context. And we think that we have the best ideas. No, there are some other events, or there's something else that supersedes the good ideas. So that's the reason why I do the show, is for posterity, that people shouldn't think that we're all dumb.
we thought you just liked hanging out with us.
Wow.
And watching us get happy.
I'm a bit more optimistic. I think there is hope that the powers that be could see reason. I think we just have to keep talking, and as usual, because Ranga is going to fire me just now if I don't end the show. As usual, we're just seeking to raise issues and expose the various facets of these complex issues. And we ask that if anybody's watching the show or listening to us, if you've got access to policymakers, raise these issues with them, because we just need the issues to be surfaced. And perhaps they may glean one or two pieces of liquid wisdom from our discussions. And we hope that we can together make a better Zimbabwe. Have a lovely weekend. Stay safe. Be good. If you can't be good, join us.